This Ravens preview here on ESPN 630. Andy Pollin here is part of the Andy Pollin Show. Every Friday at 10:30, we take a look at the upcoming game. And this week, the Ravens are headed to Los Angeles for a Sunday night game against the Chargers, who are in trouble right now. They've lost 2 straight. They had a lead against Green Bay last week. They managed to blow that. In that game, Justin Herbert was their leading rusher. 8 carries for 73 yards, but he's the quarterback. He's supposed to throw the ball. And while the Chargers have hit hard times, the Ravens are on a roll. They got the best record in the AFC at 8-3. Even the games they have lost have been games that they probably should have won. In their last game, it was a Thursday night game. They took care of Cincinnati 34-20. Lamar Jackson had 2 passing touchdowns, and Odell Beckham Jr., who was brought in to give them the pass-catching threat that they've been looking for, had a big game in that game. He caught 4 passes for 116 yards, best game of the season. So the Ravens, you would think, would be in really, really good shape heading into this game because on top of the fact that the Chargers are 4-6, they seem to be a team that's in meltdown, as Coach Brandon Staley was after blowing the lead last week at Lambeau Field.
I have full confidence, like I've told you, and like I've told you from the beginning, I have full confidence in our way of playing. Full confidence in myself as the play caller, in the way that we teach, and the way that we scheme. Full confidence in that. We got to bring this group together and do it consistently, okay? And that's where it's at. So you can stop asking that question, okay? I'm going to be calling the defenses, okay? So we're clear. So you don't have to ask that again.
Yeah, we're clear that he's calling the defenses, but people are calling for his head, including former coaches. And if the Chargers don't make the playoffs this year, you can count on a new coach there next year. You're not going to waste a talent like Justin Herbert with Brandon Staley, who's proving week after week not to be a very good coach. Now, with this going on, this was Pro Football Talk the other day. Mike Florio and Phil Simms getting a little salty as they look at this matchup for Sunday Night Football.
Ravens 3.5-point favorites. That seems a little odd to me. The Chargers are a hot mess right now. Brandon Staley feeling the heat. Doesn't want to be asked any more questions about whether or not he's going to call the defensive plays. I hope they ask him after the game whether he's going to keep calling defensive plays. Over under a 47. Chris, do you have the Ravens or the Chargers? And if so, who covers this?
Well,
spread?
I mean, like, who do I have? Like, what the f***? Who the f*** would pick the Chargers against the Ravens, okay? I mean, holy shit. I'm with you. I looked at this and went 3.5. I don't know what happened. Did the Ravens go on a crystal meth binge, and is that what they're expecting this week?
Oh, God.
I mean, what the f***?
Would definitely affect the line.
I would think so.
That would definitely affect the
line. Do they know something we don't? I mean, I swear, I just look at it and go,
well,
yeah, go ahead. What?
You know what they may know?
What?
They may know more about Lamar Jackson's ankle than we do.
Well, maybe. That's true. That is true. And we'll see where that goes, and we don't know sitting here on a Wednesday. But I look at it and go, even if his ankle isn't 100%, as long as he plays the game, I don't see any way this Chargers defense stops the Ravens offense. What? I mean, when the Ravens can do, we can run the ball at will, we can throw the ball at will, we can tie it all together. Like, the Chargers defense has no fucking chance against this Ravens offense. 0. All right? They're going to get steamrolled. And then I look at the other side of the ball where I do look at it and go, hey, the Chargers protect. They're pretty good in that way. They have a short passing game that might be able to, have a little success against some of the blitz zones against the Ravens. But ultimately, it's just too much on that side of the ball, too. I think this is a dominant Ravens win. I'm going to go 34-20 Ravens on Sunday Night Football.
Yeah, look, I see what's coming now. We're all going to pick the Ravens on Football Night in America. The Chargers are going to win, and we're going to get mocked in the next awesome schedule release video that the Chargers do next year. But I'm willing to go out on a limb. I already took the bullet once this year, taking the Bears against the Chargers. I'm not taking the Chargers against the Ravens. I'm going to take the Ravens 24-17, and it probably will be worse than that. I think the Ravens right now are one of the best teams in the AFC. They're currently the 1 seed by a half game. They are not going to loosen their grip on that.
That is Mike Florio and Phil Simms with a look at the Ravens' trip to Los Angeles on Sunday night. Now, the schedule really has been favorable for the Ravens. Now, they could have, after they played their game overseas, they could have taken a bye week. They did not. and they played more games than anybody after they played a week ago Thursday, where they beat Cincinnati at the bank 34-20. And the way things set up, they've got this Sunday night game coming up, and then they don't play again until December the 10th. They got the bye week in there. So they've already had this kind of mini bye after playing on Thursday night last week. Then they get another big bye, full bye, as they go play the Rams at home on December the 10th. Then they're at Jacksonville on the 17th. They play Christmas Day at San Francisco, but they get to finish the season with 2 games at home, one against Miami and one against Pittsburgh. And this was John Harbaugh earlier this week on how that schedule sets up for them.
I mean, I think we'll have a good feel for that when we get back, what it means to us. But this is just the way the schedule went this year. These games got spaced right here, which is what it is. We had 11 games, I think, under our belt, and nobody else had more than 9, I think, basically. And so I'm proud of the way the guys handled all that. Now our focus is on this one game. Put the best game together we can on Sunday to be as prepared as we can, play as well and hard as we can on Sunday out there in Los Angeles, and that's really what we're focused on.
And this is Harbaugh on the opportunity. They've been in prime time a number of times this year, but playing on Sunday Night Football.
You get up for every game, but, it's Sunday Night Football. It's like Thursday Night Football in the sense that everybody's watching. You're the only game, and it'll be the game that every football fan will have turned on. And our guys appreciate that because that's part of it. Players love to be on that stage, and they love to have an opportunity to compete in that kind of environment. Obviously, it's against a really good football team. It's an AFC rival. It's just an important game, so our guys will be ready to go.
Both teams playing without key players. As we said, Mark Andrews likely out for the rest of the season. Some chance that with surgery he can make it back for the playoffs, but they're going to have to play certainly the rest of the regular season without him. And same thing for the Chargers, who may be without Joey Bosa, who's got a foot injury and is expected to go on injured reserve. As far as the spread goes, you heard Florio say it, 3.5. Ravens are favored by, and the over-under is 48 points. This is also the 15th meeting between the two teams, going back to their first meeting in 1997. Baltimore leads the series 8-6. They have won 3 of the last 4. The last meeting was at Baltimore on October 17th of 2021. Ravens won the game 34-6. Not big numbers for Lamar Jackson. He had 51 yards rushing, 167 yards passing. Those aren't great numbers for putting up 34 points on the board, but they ran the ball very well. They had 3 rushing touchdowns from running backs and won that game. So this would be big for them, especially with the way the next few weeks set up. If they get to 9-3, they would have what would be a full game lead on Cleveland. And Cleveland this week, let me see, where is Cleveland playing? They may have a bye week coming up. Cleveland's at Denver, and Denver's playing very well. Yeah, Denver's on a roll right now. They've won 4 straight. So if the Ravens can get that done, they would open up a 2-game lead on the Cleveland Browns in the AFC North, and then would have that nice little bye week coming up before they play the Rams on December the 10th. So, again, it's a 8:20 kickoff, means our coverage here will start at 7:30 with the Ravens playing on Sunday Night Football right here on ESPN 630. Coming up, as bad as it was against Dallas yesterday, there was a game that they lost 32 years ago today to Dallas at home, which in some ways, even though they were sitting pretty in the division, in some ways felt worse than yesterday. We'll get to that and more as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630. Our imaging people must be off for the weekend. That's why you don't have a big voice saying, it's the Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630. But hopefully we'll get that fixed. Being for Tony from 11 to 12 and spending a lot of time on the Commanders' mess. And I must be so famished because Joseph Barbaski, who's listening, says, Andy, you stated that Norv Turner keeps patting Howell on the back. Worried about you. Well, you should be. That's not a good sign. I guess I have Norv Turner on my mind because I do remember so well what happened when he was fired by Dan Snyder during the 2000 season. That was a game they lost to the Giants 9-7. Still in the playoff hunt at 7-6. That was the game where They sent, and Norv did, he sent Eddie Murray out to kick a 49-yard field goal, and he was 44 years old. And the holder, who I think his name was the punter, forget his name, he came over and he said to Turner, he can't kick it that far. Norv said, kick it anyway. The kick came up way short. They lost the game 9-7, and Norv was fired after the game. Jody Foldesy of the Washington Times asked in the news conference, do you expect to be fired? And Norv said, hey, you're asking the wrong guy. Well, the right guy was Dan Snyder, who wasn't talking to anybody and made Norv wait outside his office for a couple of hours before Norv finally gave up and went home, and found out later that night that he was but fired. He didn't retire. He got another 2 shots, as a matter of fact, was coach of the Raiders and later the Chargers. And that Dan Snyder wanted to hire Pepper Rogers as the head coach. That's how nuts that was. And the other coaches talked him out of it, I guess, and they gave Terry Rubisky the job. And he lost 2 games to Dallas and Pittsburgh. Season was over. They finished 8-8 by beating the Cardinals in the final game. So, yeah, that's what I got on my mind. And there was nobody yesterday in Dallas who asked Ron Rivera directly, do you expect to be fired? But he was asked about his job security. And we'll play some of that as we continue into the next hour. Meantime, I wanted to look back on what happened 32 years ago today at RFK Stadium, also Thanksgiving weekend. And, boy, you look at the difference between the team now and the team then, night and day. This was arguably the greatest team in the history of the Washington franchise. It is in the discussion as the greatest team of all time. There have been polls taken. It's the greatest team of the Super Bowl era. Certainly the way they rolled through everybody, you could make that case. The playoffs were no contest. They took care of the Falcons in the divisional round, and they blew out the Detroit Lions in the championship game. And then the score doesn't even indicate what a blowout it was. I think it was 37-21 or something like that, where they beat Buffalo in the Super Bowl. But that game was never in doubt. They won that game. But they came into this weekend, to this Thanksgiving weekend, with serious talk of an undefeated season. And Tony Kornheiser, then writing for the Washington Post as a columnist before his radio and TV careers took off, he started what he called the bandwagon columns. And he started it because he looked at the first few games of the season and said, oh, my God, this team just isn't going to lose. They opened the season by beating Detroit at home 45-0. Then they went to Dallas, and Dallas was an up-and-coming team, but they beat them 33-31. And then they came home on the 15th to play Phoenix. They were the Phoenix Cardinals at that time, not yet the Arizona Cardinals. They beat them 34-0. Then they went to Cincinnati, and they won 34-27 to get to 4-0. And then they came home on September 30th to play the Eagles. They beat them 23-0. So by the end of September, they had played 3 home games, which they won by a score of, let me do the math now, 79-0 and, 90. It was over 100 points. They'd scored over 100 points at home and had not given up a single point through 3 home games. So they were a team that you said, oh, my God, I don't know how they're ever going to lose. They went to Chicago. They won. So they won that game to begin October. They played Cleveland at home, blew them out 42-17. They went to the Giants and beat them 17-13 to get to 8-0. And then if you're going to have an undefeated season, sometimes you have a game like this. And they played Houston at home. Houston was not as good. And they wound up winning this game in overtime, but should have lost. Brian Mitchell muffed a punt, which set up Ian Howfield with a chip shot field goal. I think it was less than 30 yards. Howfield missed the kick. The game went to overtime. Washington won 16-13. They're 9-0. After a close call like that, they get the Falcons the following week, and they just clobbered them. Mark Rippon was raining touchdown passes, 56-17. So they're 10-0, and now they're going to Pittsburgh, playing at Three Rivers Stadium. Not an easy game. They win that one 41-14. So in consecutive weeks, they put up 97 points in 2 games. And here come the Dallas Cowboys. They'd already beaten the Cowboys in Dallas. And the Cowboys come in, and as maybe the great coaches have said, fattening frogs for snakes. You heard that. John Thompson would say that. Other coaches have said that as well, that maybe a little bit too fat and happy with the Cowboys coming to town on November 24th. And sure enough, what happened was Alvin Harper caught a touchdown pass, a Hail Mary pass at the end of the half to give the Cowboys a 14-7 lead, and Dallas hung on to win the game 24-21. Emmitt Smith in that game had 34 carries for 132 yards and a touchdown, and Michael Irvin torching a still in his prime Darrell Green, 9 catches for 130 yards and a touchdown. Harper had 4 for 101. And the running game for Washington, which was their bread and butter, never got off the ground. Ernest Biner had only 22 yards and Ricky Irvins had 29. And they lost the game 24-21. That was their first loss of the season, as they had come into this game at 11-0 with, as you heard from Madden and Summerall to begin the telecast, seemingly a perfect season on their racket.
Nothing quite like it. RFK Stadium in Washington. It's especially different and especially exciting when the Dallas Cowboys come to town to play the Washington Redskins. I'm Pat Summerall here with John Madden, and all the talk in this town and pretty much around the country is the Redskins and their undefeated record. Can they continue, I guess, is the big question.
And I think they can, and I think a big reason is this guy right here, Joe Gibbs. He always has them motivated. He always gives them a reason they have to win. Today they have to win to clinch a division. He remembers what it is. He says we have to stop Emmitt Smith. We can't let Troy Aikman beat us. But if we win today, we can clinch our division.
Well, they didn't. They didn't win that game, and all the air kind of went out of the balloon. But interesting if they'd found a way to win that game, because they really didn't have a big challenge the rest of the way. They beat the Los Angeles Rams in Anaheim the following week, 27-6. They beat Phoenix at Phoenix, 20-14. They clobbered the Giants at RFK, 34-17. And then they did lose the final game of the season at Philadelphia, but Joe Gibbs was resting his regulars for the playoffs. Mark Rippon had only 7 sacks all year, and he benched Rippon in the second half to have Stan Humphries finish out the game. Humphries got sacked twice, so the line gave up 9 sacks for the season, which these days we call 2 games for Sam Howell. But in those days, that was all they gave up for that season. And had they been going for the undefeated season, I think Gibbs was kind of happy that they didn't go into the playoffs with an undefeated record, even though he would have been celebrated with Don Shula and all that. But because they had lost the Cowboys game, he didn't have any qualms about resting his starters in that last game, and it was close. They lost 24-22. But then rolled through the playoffs and rolled through on a Super Bowl championship. So, it's funny, like, you look at 32 years ago today and them losing that game, you go, yeah, what the heck? They're still 11-1. They're going to win the division. What are you worried about? At that time, it seemed like a big deal. It seemed like, oh, my God, they lost the game. And Tony was writing these columns every Tuesday, which he called Joe Gibbs Coach Joe, and he had all these nicknames for the other people in the division. He called Phil Simms the blonde hoser, and things like that. It was a lot of fun. It was really the end of Camelot, as it turned out. Joe Gibbs did spend one more year here in 1992, and they actually went through a stretch of like 4 or 5 games where they didn't score a touchdown, but they still won 3 of them. They just weren't as good offensively. They had a lot of injuries. They backed into the playoffs. It took a loss in the final game of the season. They played the Raiders here, and Vince Evans, who was like 40 at that time, started the game for them, and the Raiders still beat them at RFK Stadium. And that was a Saturday. The following day, I think it was Green Bay that lost. I think that's what happened, and that's how they got into the playoffs that final year in Gibbs' first go-round, and won a playoff game against Minnesota before losing at San Francisco, and that was really the end of it. Gibbs left. Richie Pettibone took over. They went 4-12. And by the way, on the Coach Watch, remember this. I was saying this to John Matthews, news director at WMAL, earlier this morning. I remember when Richie went 4-12 in that one year in 1993, so 30 years ago, after Gibbs retired for the first time in March of 93. They gave the job to Richie, who certainly had earned it. He'd been a great defensive coordinator, had all kinds of injuries. They were getting ready for the salary cap. Free agency was just coming in, and it was an old roster that just didn't have enough gas left in the tank. And they finished 4-12, and the following day was a Monday. Actually, the season ended on a Friday, so they played New Year's Eve and lost to the Minnesota Vikings to finish 4-12. You had the weekend, and so it's Monday morning, and it's early January, and there's snow on the ground, and Dan Miller, who's been the longtime voice of the Detroit Lions, gone on to a fabulous career in Detroit doing television and radio, was then our Redskins beat reporter. And he was in Ashburn at the park, and he was watching what was going on, and he said, they're shoveling out Jack Kent Cook's parking spot. So everybody knew that Cook was going to show up at the park that day and fire Richie. And Richie was still in his 50s and still a tremendous defensive coordinator. Never coached again. That was it. I think he was like 55, 56 years old. Never coached again in the NFL. Did have an opportunity. Ted Marshall-Broda, when the Ravens came to Baltimore from Cleveland in 1995, Marshall-Broda tried to talk him out of retirement to be his defensive coordinator, and Richie didn't want to do it. And that was the end of that. So, this is probably going to be the end of the coaching career for Ron Rivera, whether it's, today, Monday, or at the end of the season. I don't think he's going to coach again. I don't think he'll be a defensive coordinator, though he might. I don't know. He's still a young man, relatively young man at 61. But, these are the kind of things that happen at this time of year. The problem, as I say, with a 17-game schedule is you got this dead season that you got to drag around now for another 6 weeks. Anyway, we'll get back to the business at hand and autopsy the game from yesterday and where they stand right now as we get ready for the home stretch of these last 5 games. We'll talk about that and more as we continue with the Tony Kornheiser Show next, ESPN 630.